president, Andrew Jackson worked passionately to fulfill the needs of the common man. One of the strongest needs was new territory for safe settlement without Indian interference. As Major General of the Tennessee Militia in 1814, Jackson had shown how he used war to handle the Indian issue. In 1830, as president, he decided he would use the law to fight the Indians. He pushed the Indian Removal Act through Congress.
He believed on the basis of his own experience, what he had seen historically, that whites and Indian tribes could not live together peacefully. And he made it his position from the time he became president to encourage, ultimately to force, the Indian tribes that remained as tribes in the eastern part of the United States to move from the eastern part of the United States across the Mississippi to the unorganized territories west of the Mississippi.
The Indian Removal Act effectively nullified all earlier treaties granting tribes control of land as sovereign nations. Cherokee warriors who fought alongside Jackson in Georgia felt betrayed by the man they called Jaksashulaharjo, or Jackson, old and fierce.
I read an account written by a Cherokee soldier who was with Andrew Jackson at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. That Cherokee rifleman said, had he known in 1814 what Andrew Jackson was going to do to the Cherokee Nation, he would have shot him in the field that day.
The U.S. Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Marshall, sided with the Cherokees, declaring the Removal Act unconstitutional.
Jackson is reported to have said, in response to the 1832 decision, Justice Marshall has delivered his opinion, now let him enforce it. Jackson believed that as president, he had the right and the responsibility to interpret the Constitution as he saw fit.
Jackson was not the first president to favor Indian removal. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Adams all tried to persuade Indians to move west, but they never forced the issue. Jackson is thought by some to have had intensely personal motivations.
There were some people who said that the mother had a great hatred for the Indians because some members of the family had been killed, and that hatred she was able to communicate to her son. That's the enemy. Be careful. They're savages.
Andrew Jackson hated Indians. He hated them from early on, and he used that issue and his aggressiveness toward Native people to further his own career and to eventually become president because of it.
Jackson hoped that Indians might peacefully oblige his wishes and move west voluntarily. When that didn't happen, he sent out federal agents to deliver a blunt message. Indians must obey state law or leave. Obeying state law meant they had to pay state taxes and serve in the state militia, even fighting other Indians if called upon. If the tribes believed they could stay on their land because of prior treaties, they were wrong.
You look at their treaties, every treaty is signed by these agents and somebody that was an interpreter. And then, of course, if the United States didn't like the treaty, they just disregarded it.
Faced with overwhelming force if they resisted, the tribes slowly began to move west. First to leave were Choctaws from Mississippi, forced along by Army soldiers. During a bitter cold winter of 1831, the great-great-great-grandmother of University of Nebraska professor Donna Akers walked 500 miles with her 4 small children. 3 died when a tree struck by lightning fell on them while they slept at night.
The next morning, the soldiers came back and said that all the people had to start on down the trail. The women were, of course, still hysterical. They were mourning the death of these 3 little girls, and the men were very upset because they had not been able to do anything to help. And the troops told them that they had to move on anyway. So instead of being able to decently perform the rituals of the dead, they had to bury their bodies in shallow graves along the trail and go on.
By the end of the decade, 80,000 Indians would move, and 10,000 would die in what collectively became known as the Trail of Tears.
Many of them died actually before they even got started on the Trail of Tears because they were in these concentration camps exposed to the weather and crowded together in extremely unsanitary conditions with very little food.
Last to leave by force were the Cherokees. Many were held in prison camps before being made to walk the journey in shackles.
Let's go!
I think some of them still thought they had a deal. I think some of them still thought he's going to honor what he told me. Now, when they felt bad, I'm assuming that was when the bayonet was at their back and they were being marched to that concentration camp prior to being sent out to Oklahoma. And that's what happened to them. Double-crossed. Double-crossed. Promised one thing and another thing happened. Time and time again.
Andrew Jackson, to most Native people, is equivalent to Hitler. He's known among the Choctaw people as the Great Devil, or Blackheart.
Jackson's policy, the policy that culminated in the Trail of Tears, one of the great humanitarian tragedies in American history, was a policy that was of a piece with the policy of administrations before Jackson and after Jackson. It's easy to pin the label on Jackson because he took a more visible position. But Jackson probably would have said, this wasn't merely my policy, this was the policy of the United States government, for better or worse.
The Trail of Tears and everything really about the Indian removal is such a horror. When I went to school, a long time ago in grade school and high school, and we studied American history, there was hardly any notice of Indians. Only they were brought in occasionally as a backdrop for what the white man was doing. But now, today, with a renewed interest in all of the people who make up this country, we have found that we have done some terrible things to them. And removal is one of the worst.
It's easy for us to attack Jackson for his lack of humanity, for his lack of consideration of the Indians. He should have known better, but it's too easy for us to do that because we don't live in their world. And their world, Jackson's world, was a very brutal world.